Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another 4 p.m. Bible study. My name is Jim Schaefer, and I share with you every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 o'clock. We've been making our way through the Old Testament, looking for glimpses of Jesus in the Old Testament passages. We've arrived at the book of Micah. Micah is the sixth of the minor prophets, and we're going to be looking today specifically at a prophecy that he gives in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. And that prophecy is going to be concerning the small little city of Bethlehem. So I hope you enjoy today's lesson. I hope that I share with you something that's a little bit new, perhaps something that you've never heard before. That's kind of my goal as I move through these lessons to point out the references to Jesus in the Old Testament, but also to give you something a little bit new, perhaps that you've never heard before, that you've never considered before. I see that Jackie Snyder is with us. Robin Sharkey is here. Jeff Pugh is here. Welcome, guys. I'm glad that you're here. I know that many of you joined me after the fact on the reruns, as they're called. I want to thank you for taking time to be a part of this Bible study. I hope you are finding it enriching and helpful in your spiritual walk. Now, we have just a handful of Bible studies left in this series. We're going to look at today at Micah. Then we will have 4 lessons on the book of Zechariah, and we will end with one final look at the book of Malachi. And that will complete our study. We will have looked at over 50 references concerning Jesus Christ, glimpses of Jesus in the Old Testament. I'm not sure where I'm going to be heading into the new year, but I would love for you to share with me areas that you have that are of interest, and feel free to place them in the comments and let me know what you would like to study about. So, as I said, today's glimpse of Jesus is going to be from the book of Micah. Now, Micah, as I said, was the sixth of the minor prophets. And if you recall, the minor prophets were not lesser prophets. We refer to them as minor prophets only because they didn't write as much as the major prophets did. Now, Micah lived during the time of the divided kingdom. He was a contemporary with Isaiah and Hosea and Amos, and much of his ministry occurred during the reign of King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was one of the good kings of Judah. Now, like the other prophets that worked alongside of him, much of his ministry focused on the northern kingdom of Israel and provided a warning to them to repent, or they would be carried off into captivity by the Assyrians, which of course did happen. So, today we're going to look at Micah chapter 5, verse 2, and that verse says, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrath, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times." It's an interesting passage. And again, we're going to talk about this city of Bethlehem. I see that Evelyn McGuire has joined us. Hello, Evelyn. I'm glad that you're here. Please make sure you say hello to your husband for me. A couple of little bits of humor as we get ready to enter into this. Now, we're getting ready to enter into the Christmas season. And so studying the city of Bethlehem just seems to be appropriate during this time. Now, I read that Joseph probably had a lot of doubts concerning Mary and her pregnancy, but thankfully, by the time he got to Bethlehem, he was coming to his senses. Census. Census. Think about it. Why was he going to Bethlehem for the census because he was of the tribe of Judah. Sorry, dad pun, couldn't help it. Uh, Here's the second one. How did Mary and Joseph know Jesus's weight when he was born? There was a way in the manger. Oh, that's even worse than the first one, isn't it? Well, I got to try one more time. One of the things that's really big during our day and age are the Kevins and Karens that are out there. And I heard this one and I couldn't help but include it. Did you hear about the Karen who went to Bethlehem and demanded to see the manger? Not the manager, the manger. Okay, sorry. I thought they were cute for whatever that was worth. So let's take a look at this passage. We're going to focus on the city of Bethlehem. Now, Bethlehem is not a part of the Gaza Strip where all of the attention is taking place today, but Bethlehem is a part of the Palestinian territory. Now, it was after the Six-Day War in 1967 that Bethlehem became a part of Israel. And again, because of the skirmishes there, Israel had taken over control. But in 1995, Israel ceded the control of Bethlehem to the newly established Palestinian Authority. And this was done in preparation for that two-state solution where both could live side by side. Again, the problem is that the Palestinians don't want to live peacefully side by side with the Jews. They want to exterminate the Jews. And so you constantly have this tension in this area. But I think it's important to note that the city of Bethlehem, at least today, is within the Palestinian territory. Now, of course, back in biblical times, it was very much a part of Israel, in particular, Judah. It was one of the cities that was a part of ancient Israel. So, it is understanding that we take a look at this passage in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Now, Bethlehem. Most of us have heard of this small city in Bethlehem. Its importance is really undeniable. For the Jews, it's important because it is the birthplace of their greatest king, King David. King David was born in Bethlehem, and he would rule over the entire nation of Israel from 1013 to about 996 BC. Now, for the Christians, Bethlehem is important because it is the place where the Savior was born, Jesus Christ, at least according to Matthew's gospel and Luke's gospel. Bethlehem, that's where the Messiah would be born. And we see in the book of Micah the prophecy concerning that. Now, there are 28 cities scattered around the world with the name Bethlehem. 18 of them are located here in the United States. There's even a Bethlehem, Ohio. The one that most of us are probably familiar with is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Well, the city that Micah is talking about, the Bethlehem he refers to, was only 5 miles from Jerusalem. The city of Bethlehem was never among the most populated of the kingdoms of Judah. In fact, the very first mention of this city is all the way back in the book of Genesis. Now, most of us know that the word Bethlehem is really a combination of two Hebrew words, bet, which means house, and lehem, or lechem, which means bread. And so the word Bethlehem has the meaning the house of bread. Now, this kind of indicates to us that this was an area that had plentiful wheat fields, and it becomes known as the house of bread because of the agriculture that surrounded it. In fact, we are told that this area is also referred to as Ephrath, and the word Ephrath means the idea of being plentiful. All right, and this is a very important part of the meaning of the word Bethlehem. Now, as I said, the first mention of this small city is found in Genesis chapter 35. It tells us that Jacob's wife, Rachel, died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Now, one of the reasons that the book of Genesis mentions Ephrath in connection with Bethlehem was there was another city in the ancient world by the name of Bethlehem, and it's mentioned in the book of Joshua, chapter 19. It was located near the Sea of Galilee in the land of Zebulun. So it's a part of the northern tribes. The addition of the word Ephrath becomes essential in designating this particular Bethlehem, which is in the southern portion of ancient Israel, or the land of Judah. And as I said, Ephrath means fruitfulness or abundance. And so you have the combination of these two words, fruitfulness or abundance, with the house of bread. Now, most of us have heard that Jesus, who called himself the bread of life, one of the terms that is used to describe him in the New Testament, was born in the house of bread and was placed in a manger, which was a feeding trough. And so we see, this kind of layered idea here as to what Bethlehem is. Now, in spite of names that indicate the house of bread and plentiful, the first mention of Bethlehem in the Bible, it is associated with death, with sorrow. So let's look at that story in Genesis 35. It says, they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had a hard labor. Now it came to pass, when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said to her, do not fear, you will have this son also. And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, which his father called Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem, and Jacob set a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. If you were to be in the Holy Lands and you were to travel to Bethlehem, you would pass a memorial that to this day stands in memory of Rachel and her death at this spot. Now, if you remember, Rachel was the favorite wife of Jacob. Now, this gets a little complicated. I provided you with a diagram. Some of you responded to that. It showed up in my feed last year, and it just so happened to remind me of that, and so I reposted it. If you remember, Jacob, when he went looking for a wife, he went and worked for Laban, and there he had met one of Laban's daughters named Rachel, whom he fell madly in love with. And he agreed to work 7 years for Uncle Laban in order to have Rachel as his bride. Now, most of you know the story that after 7 years, as he takes his new bride and has his way with her, he discovers that Laban has tricked him and that it's not Rachel, but it's Rachel's sister, Leah. And when he complains, uh, Laban says, well, I'm sorry, she's the oldest daughter and she has to marry before the younger one, and that's just too bad. That's the way it is. And so we find that Jacob then agrees to work 7 additional years in order to get the wife he wanted to begin with. So he works really for 14 years to get Rachel, the bride he really wanted. Now, Rachel gave Jacob 2 children, Joseph, who was the prominent individual at the end of the book of Genesis, and gives us an explanation as to why the children of Jacob, of Israel, are in Egypt. And Joseph and Benjamin were the 2 favorite sons of Jacob. Now, this favorite wife, Rachel, who has borne him now 2 children, of whom were his favorite, she dies giving birth to Benjamin, and she is buried just outside of Bethlehem. That's the first reference to Bethlehem. And it's associated with this extremely sad story. The very beginning, the very first mention of Bethlehem places it alongside the subject of death. Now, let's go a little further. The next time we encounter the city of Bethlehem is in the story of Ruth. Now, if you remember, Ruth was from Bethlehem. Bethlehem, at the beginning of Ruth, is once again associated with death and misery and hardship and pain. In the beginning of Ruth's story, a famine has come upon the land of Canaan, and a man from Bethlehem by the name of Elimelech had moved with his family to Moab. And there he died along with his 2 sons. His wife, Naomi, and one of the sons' wives, Ruth, returns to the city of Bethlehem, and the transformation of this city begins. So you see, again, we have this story concerning Ruth that starts there in Bethlehem with Elimelech and his wife, Naomi, and they have to move from Bethlehem because of famine, because of death, because not of abundance, but of shortages. And they leave to the area of Moab, and there Elimelech dies, 2 of his sons die, and his wife and one of his daughter-in-laws return back to the city of Bethlehem. Now, Ruth, the daughter-in-law, will go on to meet and marry Boaz, who is Elimelech's brother, and will settle in the town of Bethlehem. And the climax of the book of Ruth tells us that Boaz will be the father of Obed, and Obed will be the father of Jesse, and Jesse will be the father of the one who will be known as King David. So, in spite of these stories, this area to begin with is associated with pain and death and misery. But we see in this story and in the events that are to follow a transformation. God takes something that is associated with pain and misery and death and brings about something that is fruitful and positive and filled with promise for the future. And he does the same thing for our lives as well. Now, we have already seen in Genesis 49 verse 10, as well as other places, that the Messiah would come from the line of Judah. The land originally given to the tribe of Judah surrounded Jerusalem, and that included the nearby small little village known as Bethlehem. Now, the New Testament makes it abundantly clear that Bethlehem is precisely the place where Jesus is born to Mary. We read in Luke chapter 2. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea to Bethlehem, the town or the city of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register for the census with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. Now, we know that this city that Micah prophesied about was the city that the Messiah was going to be born. We see that in that the Gentile magi that came from the east, they knew all about Micah's prophecy that Bethlehem in Judea is where the promised Messiah was going to be born. So Micah, writing 700 years before Jesus' birth, pinpoints the exact location, the exact town where this delivery of the promised one would take place. Now, the place referred to by Micah is clearly Bethlehem in Judea. What else did Micah have to say about this ruler? Notice he continues in verse 2 of our text, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Now, he knows that King David is going to be born in Bethlehem. That already has taken place. So what he's sharing is that there's going to be another one that comes that's going to be even greater, one whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Here Micah is speaking of the pre-existent Christ, the creator of the universe. Jesus is also the ruler of the universe that he created. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2, we read, but in these last days, God has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. Speaking of Jesus, Paul, in the book of Ephesians, writes, and God placed all things under his feet and appointed him to be the head over everything for the church. Jesus Christ is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Now, in our text, in verses 4 and 5a, Micah goes on and he says concerning this one who was to come, he will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of his name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. And he ends with this line, and he will be their peace. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He came into this world and he brings peace. Now, clearly, the shepherd will not just be a deliverer or a shepherd to the nation of Israel alone. His greatness, according to Michael, will reach to the ends of the earth. His blessing and rule will be for the whole world. Now, one last thought. One last word concerning Micah's prophecy. In chapter 6, one chapter later, in verse 8, these words appear. He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Now, the Amplified Version, and if you've ever used the Amplified Version, you know that what the Amplified Version does is it tries to take every shade of meaning in a passage and it makes mention of every shade of meaning possible. Now, it doesn't make for a real easy reading Bible, but it does give you a greater picture of what the text is actually saying. And here's what it says. He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you except to be just and to love and to diligently practice kindness, compassion, and to walk humbly with your God, setting aside any overblown sense of importance or self righteousness? It's interesting to me that Jesus, during his earthly ministry, is continually challenged and harassed by the leaders of the Jewish people, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. It's interesting that they had cast this verse aside and had tried to establish their own righteousness by attempting to keep every little detail of the Mosaic law and more. And Jesus condemned their selfish attempts at righteousness by saying, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the most important matters of the law." What are those? Here's what Jesus says: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Exactly what Micah has stated. And Jesus goes on and says, you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. Now, ultimately, these men would lead to Jesus's death. And we are the same way. We tend to neglect justice and mercy and faithfulness. We need to understand that our righteousness comes from him and him alone. We need that ruler from Bethlehem to rule in our hearts. You see, we are incapable of carrying out the law in our own strength. We need God's help. You can't live the Christian life in your own strength. You have to rely on him. And Micah gives us a glimpse of all of this 700 years before Jesus is even born. He pinpoints the exact location where the Messiah would come. That little town of Bethlehem, the one that had experienced a move from pain and tragedy and death to one of hope for the future. What a great story it is, and how perfectly everything fits together. Well, I hope you have a wonderful day. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you have seen something new in this passage today. Please share with me your reactions, share the video. And again, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all next week as we start our look at the last two books, Zechariah and Malachi, as we bring this study to a close. God bless you. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful weekend. God bless.